Welcome to our Author at Home workshop series. Today we're going to be making our beautiful little lily bowls. So if you have purchased one of our kits, you can have everything that you need to jump onto this workshop straight away. If not, there'll be a list of everything that you need in the show notes for all the clay and equipment for you to be able to complete this as well. A few things that you will need that aren't included. One is a rolling pin. If you don't have a rolling pin, you can use a wine bottle, you can use anything you like that's going to help you kind of roll out sheets of clay. With this small lily bowl size, you can just use your hand as well to kind of bash the clay down. And I have a beautiful wooden board. You can use a chopping board or do it straight on a wooden table. Anything that the clay's not going to stick to is perfect. So in our little handy kit here, we have two polystyrene little discs. If you haven't bought the kit, find something similar. You can buy these from some stores. We also sell these separately on our website. Otherwise, you can use a ring of paper, anything just to help you kind of form the little shape that we're going to. You have a nice little sponge and a needle. If you don't have a needle and you're doing this yourself at home, you can use a little knife. That'll do the trick, and a sponge is pretty key. So that's everything that we have in the kit, along with about 1 kilo of clay. So this is our Sand Dune clay. You can select from any clay from a ceramic provider, like a club or online store, or you can use air-dried clay, which then you've just got to let dry and paint with acrylic paint if you don't have access to a kiln service or clay club. Alright, so we're going to jump into it. So the first thing we're going to do is get everything we need out for the workshop. So we've got our clay, we've got our little polystyrene donuts, we'll get our little needle out and our sponge. The other thing I've got here is a little bowl with some water in it. That's for our sponge to go on and help us sort of smoothen out all the surfaces. So the first thing we're going to do is rip off a little ball of clay, about a golf ball size. Mine's a giant golf ball. Doesn't matter too much. This is just to help kind of learn and feel how the clay is going to crack and kind of work within your hands. If you've had experience with clay before, you can skip this step and jump straight on to the next part. So once you've got your ball of clay, you're going to use your thumb and you're going to push down straight in to the clay. So this is called a pinch pot. Once we push down into the clay, I'm going to pinch my hand around the clay like this. As we're going around, you'll start to notice that the clay will crack around the rim. That's all good, that's going to happen. And that's what we're going to learn as we're doing this, how to fix and adjust those little things. So as we're going around, if we want to keep the clay nice and high, you're going to use your outside fingers to pinch the clay up and over, kind of curling the clay like that. It's going to lift the clay up from the bottom and keep a nice bit of height. If you want to go out, so kind of a nice low dippy bowl, you're going to do the opposite. So using your thumb, you're pinching the clay and pulling out slightly. Now the trick with this is taking your time, relaxing, pour yourself a wine, grab a beer, and sit back and relax. Nice, soft movements around the clay. I'm going to do this really quickly just so we're not here all day watching me. Alright. As you go around, you'll notice that there's potentially quite a bit of weight or thickness at the bottom. So this is when the board comes in really handy. You're going to sit the clay on the little board and you're going to press down. We're aiming for about 1/2 to 1 centimeter thickness. Imagine a little bowl that you have in the kitchen. That's about the thickness that we're going for. Now everything that you make is going to shrink. Fired clay like this will shrink by about 10%. If it's air-dried clay, it's only going to shrink by a few centimeters. So just factor that in with the size of the pieces that you're making. Now I have my beautiful little pinch pot. You will see there are lots of cracks around the rim of the dish. This is where the sponge and the water comes in handy. So you're going to take your sponge out of the water, and the trick with this is squeezing all the water out of the sponge. Clay is essentially mud, so if we add too much water to the clay, we're going to have a real muddy mess. So we just want a nice damp sponge. We're going to roll that around the rim, and that's going to work kind of like an eraser. It's going to get rid of all of those little cracks. You can work around the whole dish and wipe away a lot of those cracks. General rule of thumb with ceramics is a small crack or little mark will kind of disappear during the firing process. Once the clay fills it in, it's not that noticeable. You will see it, but you won't really notice it. Any slightly larger cracks tend to get much bigger during the drying and the firing process. So that's when you really want to spend a bit of time and go around and get rid of it. If you do have a large crack like this, overlap the two bits of clay using your thumb, a nice dry thumb, smoothing out that edge, and then do the same on the inside. Now, they can be quite tricky because the clay is quite soft to get rid of all of the cracks at this point. So a good idea is to set this to the side, and at the end of the workshop, in about an hour's time or 2 hours time or half an hour time, when it feels nice and firm, go back around with that damp sponge and you can really tidy it up. And that's also a great time to write your name, initials, or whatever you want at the bottom. That's called your maker's mark, and that's going to be helpful when it comes to the firing to identify your work. Alright, so now we're feeling a little bit more comfortable. We understand how clay works. We're going to jump into the next step. So, we're going to half the clay that we've got left. And this is going to be more than enough to make one of our little dishes. The trick with this is to start off with more clay that you need, so you've got a little bit of room to make mistakes. Alright, so we're going to slap the clay into a nice ball shape, and then you're going to plonk that on your board or the surface that you're working on. Now the trick is to take a lot of the weight out of the clay with the flat part of your hand. So simply just pressing down. Sometimes it's good just to kick that chair back, stand over it, and really push the clay down. Flip the clay over and press the clay down. And if you don't have a rolling pin, you can do this the whole way down to the right thickness that you want. I've got a rolling pin, so I'm going to roll the clay out. Now the trick with rolling is you do a few rolls, then you're going to lift the clay up and flip the clay over. Roll the clay out, lift the clay up, flip it over. Now this does a few things. One, it stops the clay from sticking to the surface that we're working on. As we're pushing the clay down, the clay gets a little bit of friction on the board. So every time we lift it up and flip it over, it relaxes and allows the clay to shift out. So if you just go like this, you'll be here for like 2 weeks. Okay, so again, we're rolling this out to about 1 centimeter thick. If you want a really thick, chunky bowl, just have a thicker sheet to start with. If you want it to be quite thin and delicate, then just roll it out a little bit thinner. So I'm going for about that centimeter thick. Nice, smooth, rolls. Alright. And don't worry, you'll notice as you're rolling out your clay, the clay will crack quite a lot. As we learned with the pinch pot before, we're going to get rid of that and sort all that out at the end. So it's nothing too much to worry about at this stage. Okay, so now we have our nice sheet of clay, and this is about 1 centimeter, oh, probably ½ centimeter thick. I'm going to get my little donut. Now I'm going to place it over the clay, like this, and I'm going to cut around this. You can simply embrace the shape of the clay that you've got right now, or you could cut out kind of a wavy shape, and this will just affect or change the shape and form. I'm going to place this on, and you can cut it tight around the circle, and that will create a nice kind of small dish like this one here. Or you can go a little bit bigger and have a little bit more height. For this one, I'm going to go a little bit bigger. So I'm cutting about 1 centimeter away from the donut. And you're just dragging your knife or needle around the clay. The excess clay, we're just going to pull this off, and we can use this later to make more pinch pots or another one of these little dishes. So at this point, I'm going to remove the donut, and now we're going to tidy up the rough edges. So using my sponge, I'm going to wipe around the edges. Remember, the key part of this is really squeezing all that water out so you're not working in a really wet area. And then using the sponge, I'm going to wipe over the top, make sure that I get rid of any cracks, any marks that I might have created from the rolling pin. They're all going to get wiped away. Now at this point, I'm going to write my little maker's mark. So I'm going to write my name underneath with a little heart so that I can give it to my wife. So now I'm going to flip this over and repeat that process. Wipe around those edges. I'm aiming to get a really nice, smooth, rounded edge. If I have a really square, sharp edge, it just means the edge of this, once it's fired, if it is quite sharp, will just get a little bit sharper. So now that I've wiped that around, I'm going to grab my little donut and I'm going to place this using my hands underneath. I'm going to place it in the donut. Now I'm going to curl up the sides and curl up the edge a little bit so that it sits into the donut, and that's how we start to get the height and these beautiful little curls around it. So I put my hands around and I'm basically shoving it in to the donut. It'll start to fall quite natural, and as you can see, just by placing it like that, it already looks really, really cool. And you can, the best way to do this is to force it in there, but let it sit quite naturally. The more you try to manipulate the clay, the less organic and natural it looks. So once it's in, I'm going to push down the base of the clay so that it sits nice and flat. We don't want this to rock and roll too much. A little bit of roll's alright. We're going to push that down. And now you can look at the shape and have a bit of a play around. Do I love how it looks right now, or do I want to twist, bend and fold it a little bit more? I actually really like how this sits. This is looking pretty good, so I'm going to leave this one. I think that looks pretty cool. I'm happy with that. So, our little maker's mark underneath, that is our first lily bowl. What we're going to do is we're going to set this aside to dry for about 1 to 2 days. At that time, you'll feel and see that it really starts to dry. You can pop it off the donut, and it needs to be bone dry, which you'll see the color change and it'll be really brittle. At that point, that's when you want to drop it off to your kiln, local kiln service or kiln provider. And they will do what's called the bisque firing. So that's where they fire it to 1,000 degrees, take all the moisture out, and then put a clear glaze on and fire it next. So what we'll do is we're going to change the angle of the camera for you so you can really see on top, and I'll repeat that for you. And if you like, you can just jump straight into making these, or you can watch the video again, watch the next stage, pause, play, and jump straight into it. There's not too much that can go wrong with these. It's all about having fun, having a bit of a play. If you don't like how the dish is sitting, you can simply curl the plate over like this and have a really cute kind of bowl. It's totally up to you. You can be as free as you want to create any way you like. Ideally, as you're going, try not to spend too much time trying to really perfect it. The more that you bend and fold and move things around, you'll tend to get little cracks. So that's something you want to be careful of. Embrace that imperfection. All these little cracks, just remember, sponge in the water, squeeze all that water out, and just wipe them away. Avoid squishing water on and using the water to wipe to wipe away the cracks. It does a little bit more harm than good. Cool, alright, so we'll change the camera angle and we'll jump into another round. You should have enough clay to make about 2 to 3 of these, depending on how much clay you use in your pinch pot. It's totally up to you. You can make lots of pinch pots, you can make lots of these, and depending on how big you go with these little dishes, they're the perfect size for a little tea light at this size. The next one I'm going to make a bit larger, just so you can see the difference of how it is to work with a little bit more clay with making one of these. Cool, let's get into it. So with a larger sheet of clay, we're going to fold it into the disc just like before. Okay, so now you can really just bend, fold. Make sure you're really happy with how the shape and form. I'm pretty happy with that. I like the organicness. I like that this sort of sits a bit lower and this side's a little bit higher. I'm pretty happy with all the bends and folds. So now we're going to go through and get rid of all of these little cracks. Remembering that rule that any tiny little crack you won't notice too much, but any larger cracks will get much larger. One thing to avoid is really sharp changes in angle, in the angle. So you can actually see in here, there's a bit of a sharp change in the angle. That can cause a little bit of problems with cracking. One thing you can do if you're a little bit worried about it is roll a kind of a noodle, little snaky bit of clay, and we're just going to add a little bit of extra clay. And this is nice and wet, so we don't need to score it. We can just add that little bit of clay straight in there, and you can use the end of your needle to join that in. And make sure that it looks nice and smooth, and then we go over with the sponge and sponge that out and make sure that looks nice and good. Alright, cool. So I'm pretty happy with that. So like I said, now we're going to sit this, we're going to allow it to dry, and after a few hours you can go back if you want to and just sort of double check, make sure that you're happy, get rid of any extra kind of marks or creases, and that's when the clay will be nice and firm and you can really sort of go around and you can write your maker's mark or anything like that. But you don't have to. You can get it to this stage, make sure you're pretty happy with it, and then leave it at that. Now, the one that we made at the start, this one here is a little bit drier. So ideally you want to leave these for about sort of 2 days. just so they are really, really firm. But I'll just show you this now. Once it pops off, as that dries, that'll sit nice and cute on your little table without that. So when you do remove them from the mold, it's quite a good idea to just using your fingers to press down just in the middle to make sure that there is a bit of a flat point in that center, just so that they don't rock too much. This has a little bit of a rock, but it doesn't matter, they sit very stable. So basically this here will dry, and once it's fired, will turn into this right here. If you've made a piece and you're not happy with it, as long as the clay isn't super dry and it's still nice and damp, you can simply smush it back up and start again. If the clay is very dry, like this piece here, you'll have a lot of trouble making something that won't crack and won't sort of fall apart. So ideally, try not to do that too many times. So the real trick with this is just to really relax and enjoy the moment and enjoy what happens with the clay. Try not to be a perfectionist. I think the more that you fiddle with the clay, the more that, not that things can go wrong, but the more you kind of move and shift the clay around, the more likely you have cracks, and sometimes the best things just happen naturally. So embrace that, sit back, relax, yeah, and enjoy having a go with this. Clay is meant to be fun, it's meant to be relaxing, so pour a wine and enjoy making these cute little dishes with friends and family. Thank you for following along. If you've got any questions, please feel free to sing out. If you're new to Author, if you could subscribe, it means the world to us, helps us get our classes out to more people. Thank you very much and have fun.